Tonight, Canada cuts back embassy staff as Haiti's crisis grows.
We are still very much, some of us are still very much here. I am here and I don't intend to depart anytime soon.
Diplomats airlifted, but thousands of Canadians remain behind.
All the airlines have canceled all the flights.
As gang violence grips the capital. A former Quebec judge pleads guilty to manslaughter in the death of his wife.
It is a landmark and it's unprecedented on Canadian judicial history.
A controversial plan to curb crime in the self-checkout aisle. Plus, from parking to housing, a blueprint to build more homes in one of Canada's priciest real estate markets.
The cities that we have had need to change if we're going to accommodate our population growth.
And a successful test flight for SpaceX.
3, 2, 1.
But still far from mission accomplished.
CTV National News with Omar Sachedina.
Good evening, everyone. We begin tonight with a crisis in Haiti and a catastrophe that has prompted Canadian diplomats in the country's capital to take urgent safety measures. Most Canadian staff in the embassy were airlifted in a chartered helicopter today to work remotely in neighboring Dominican Republic, a country that has stepped up border patrols over fears of a mass exodus from Haiti, where close to 3,000 Canadians remain. Global Affairs says there are no plans to offer assisted departure or repatriation flights. The chaos is intensifying as people run for their lives, caught in the crossfire of gang violence. And now the UN says Haiti, which is already the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, has 1 million people on the brink of famine. CTV's Michael Couture starts us off with the growing desperation.
Smoke wafts from Haiti's National Penitentiary. It follows a reported jailbreak orchestrated by armed gangs in the capital, Port-au-Prince. With the situation deteriorating, Canada has relocated most staff from the embassy. They will now continue their duties from the Dominican Republic.
It is not easy. The humanitarian and security catastrophe that's going on in Haiti right now.
Canadian officials wouldn't say exactly how many were airlifted out of the country, but did say between 10 and 50% of the team remains behind. While Canada's embassy is closed, the ambassador, essential staff, and security remain.
Having a smaller footprint, obviously, it makes everything else a lot easier because we have more resources for those of us who remain behind.
According to Global Affairs Canada, just under 3,000 Canadian citizens are registered in Haiti right now. They've all been instructed to shelter in place or limit movements, with gangs controlling up to 80% of the capital. The airport remains closed, so Canadians there are left in limbo.
All the airlines have canceled all the flights out, so I'm just patiently waiting, hoping there's something to happen.
Rocheleau is about half an hour south of the violence that gripped the capital for months and led to the resignation of Prime Minister Ariel Henry. Kenya has agreed to lead an international police force to restore order, but only once a transitional presidential council is created. And locals say any new leadership should be chosen by Haitians. Canadian officials say there are no evacuation or repatriation flights scheduled to get Canadians out of Haiti, but they are developing plans in case that becomes necessary. Omar.
All right, Michael Couture in Ottawa. In the American capital today, the highest-ranking Jewish official, Senator Chuck Schumer, called Israel's leader a major obstacle to peace.
Prime Minister Netanyahu has lost his way by allowing his political survival to take the precedence over the best interests of Israel.
The top Senate Democrats pressed for elections in Israel, adding the civilian death toll in Gaza has pushed support for Israel worldwide to, quote, historic lows. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has not responded, but says he still intends to press ahead with an invasion of Rafah, despite growing international pressure not to. For the first time since yesterday's key vote in the U.S. House of Representatives that could lead to a ban for millions of TikTok users in the U.S., Canada's Prime Minister weighed in. CTV's Alison Bamford on what he said and what we learned today about how Ottawa secretly scrutinized the app here months ago.
A revelation about Canadian TikTok coming to light now that the app could go dark in the U.S. Ottawa carried out a national security review of the video streaming app last September.
We're watching, of course, the debate going on in the United States, and I can't comment on national security reviews.
The federal government indicated TikTok will be subject to enhanced scrutiny under a new policy, but says details on the review are confidential. In response to security concerns amid the U.S. bill, TikTok's CEO took to the app, ensuring users their information is safe and free from manipulation.
This bill gives more power to a handful of other social media companies. It will also take billions of dollars out of the pockets of creators and small businesses.
A ripple effect that will undoubtedly be felt by Canadian TikTokers.
Today I want to make a hot dog, but in Ukrainian way.
Andrian Makhnichov creates content around his new life in Canada as a Ukrainian, managing to make it his full-time job.
It's become one of the biggest part of my life. It changed my life, and it's become one of the things that helped me to go through depression and stress.
Americans only make up 15% of his followers, but he worries what could happen if the app goes black here in Canada. Some experts say there's no need to panic just yet.
The Canadian government is not saying we're going to follow suit. This is just an acknowledgement that the government is doing its due diligence against a potentially malign actor to protect Canadians.
China is accusing the U.S. of bullying and using unsubstantiated claims of national security risks to suppress the app. TikTok says it would need Beijing's approval to divest the company within 6 months. If they get the green light, there's already interest from big-name buyers in North America. Omar?
All right, Elson, thank you. The suspect in Ottawa's deadliest mass murder made another court appearance today. His lawyer revealing his client is in protective custody.
I have been in touch with his family. They're obviously very upset.
19-year-old Fabrício de Zoysa is charged with 6 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of attempted murder. He's accused of killing a mother, her 4 children, and their family friend. The husband suffered serious injuries. A man who once held the privileged position of ensuring justice made an admission that ended his own nearly 15-year legal saga. Jacques Delisle, believed to be the first Canadian judge to ever stand trial for murder, was convicted in 2012 in the death of his wife. Now, at the age of 88, he has admitted to manslaughter. CTV's Montreal Bureau Chief Geneviève Beauchemin reports.
Former Judge Jacques Delisle fought in court for 15 years against the most serious charge in the criminal code, first-degree murder. Today, he pled guilty to a reduced charge of manslaughter in a case that continues to divide.
I always felt there was sort of a sense of excitement about the idea of being the first prosecution of a judge in the Western world for murder.
The Crown and defense told the court that they struck a deal to put an end to this 15-year legal saga, but that they still disagree on the facts of the case. Delisle, now 88, was accused of killing his wife, Nicole Rainville, in 2008. Then he told police Rainville, who had suffered a stroke, a broken hip, was depressed, and that she had taken his gun while he was away and taken her own life. But in 2012, the former judge was found guilty of first-degree murder. The Crown's theory to this day is that Delisle was holding the weapon that killed his wife.
But we still believe that Mr. Delisle would have been found a first-degree murder if he were to stand trial.
The defense says Delisle now admits he lied to police in 2009, that in fact he loaded the weapon as his wife had asked and left the gun near her, then left their condo, that he found her dead when he returned. Delisle, his children and advocates argued for years he was wrongfully convicted at his first trial, saying pathologists and a Montreal lab made serious errors. They convinced then Justice Minister David Lametti, who, despite a conflicting legal report, ordered a new trial that in the end never took place. Today's guilty plea changes nothing for supporters.
There's no doubt he was a victim of miscarriage of justice.
In court today, Delisle declined to make a statement. He was sentenced to 8 years and 311 days. That's time served after his first trial, plus a day.
There is not this cloud over him anymore. That's certainly a relief.
And DeLille was placed in handcuffs to go spend his last few hours in custody. Geneviève Beauchemin, CTV News, Montreal.
Former U.S. President Donald Trump was back in court today trying to get charges of mishandling classified documents dismissed, but the judge said no. CTV's Washington Bureau Chief Joey Malbin on Trump's latest legal obstacle.
Donald Trump's motorcade arrived at a Florida courthouse. He didn't have to be here, but his criminal cases are part of his presidential campaign now. The former president accused of willfully taking hundreds of classified documents to Mar-a-Lago, top secret information about nuclear weapons and national security, and refusing to hand them back.
I took them very legally, and I wasn't hiding them.
Trump claims they were his personal papers, and his lawyers argue the law around security secrets is too vague and that the case should be thrown out. But Judge Aileen Cannon, a Trump appointee, rejected that, saying it's difficult to see how this gets you to a dismissal of the indictment. Trump's appearance in Florida comes as the future of his election subversion case in Georgia is in question. Remember the Find Me the Votes call? Trump imploring officials to overturn Joe Biden's election victory?
I just want to find 11,780 votes.
Trump accuses District Attorney Fani Willis of a conflict of interest, saying she lied about her romance with the prosecutor she hired for the case. She denies any wrongdoing.
Do you think I'm on trial? These people are on trial for trying to steal an election in 2020.
The judge expected to decide soon if Willis should be disqualified or not. Either way, it's another delay. Now Trump's hush money criminal trial over falsifying business records to pay off porn star Stormy Daniels may be postponed too. Set to go to trial in 2 weeks, Trump's lawyers want more time to review tens of thousands of pages in evidence.
Trump's legal maneuvering has managed to delay his criminal trials, perhaps even until the election. And while he waits for the Supreme Court to rule on his claim, he has presidential immunity from prosecution. Omar?
All right, Joy, thank you. SpaceX soared to new heights today, launching a third test flight of the world's most powerful rocket. After 2 previous letdowns after liftoff, this one's being widely celebrated, even though it was lost on re-entry. CTV's Andrew Johnson explains.
4, 3, 2, 1.
The largest flying object ever made blasts off from Texas, the third test flight for SpaceX's Starship rocket.
If you've ever stood on the 35th floor of a building and looked down from there, you get a sense of how high up you are. That's how big this rocket is. It's like a 35-story building taking off from the ground.
The first 2 attempts last year ended in explosions minutes after launch. Not this time.
We got a Starship on its way to space and a booster on the way back to the Gulf.
Test flight number 3 reached new heights, traveling more than halfway around the world. The flight lasted close to an hour and lit up mission control.
Now, like we said, this plasma field is, what a view.
The mission, in the end, incomplete. The rocket was destroyed during its return to Earth. But experts say this failure is a success.
They'll be ecstatic with the progress they made today. There's no question about that.
SpaceX founder Elon Musk celebrated on X, reminding us of the ultimate goal. But well before a mission to Mars, NASA's plan to land astronauts on the moon using Starship technology.
It's great news for space travel because we are one step closer to the next steps on the moon. This rocket is what's supposed to get people to the surface of the moon and walking around and then getting back in and flying home.
Elon Musk says he's hoping for 6 more Starship test flights this year alone. As for humanity's first return to the surface of the moon in more than 50 years, well, that's scheduled for September 2026. Omar.
Counting down. All right, Andrew, thank you. Coming up, shifting gears on housing.
The cities that we have had need to change if we're going to accommodate our population growth.
The push to replace cars with people. Plus, overcoming adversity on and off the ice. Canada's biggest city is pushing a plan to help tackle the housing crisis, using parking lots to build homes. It's an old idea attracting new attention, but also pushback from critics. CTV's Heather Wright on why they want to put the brakes on the proposal.
Toronto parking lots could soon become building lots as the city tries to find more land for housing.
The cities that we have had need to change if we're going to accommodate our population growth.
Toronto owns roughly 300 parking lots. An estimated 130 could be converted into land for housing. It's not a new concept and has been tried before with considerable pushback. But Mark Richardson of Housing Now TO argues cheap parking is not the right use for valuable land.
If we're going to subsidize something, if we're going to provide discounts to something, we should be providing it for housing in these transit-oriented neighborhoods.
But in a city like Toronto, where transit is not always reliable, many say driving and parking are still a fact of life.
I think a lot of people, even if they could take transit, they don't want to rely on it for work.
Low housing inventory, record prices, and sky-high rent are all contributing to a housing crisis playing out across the country, forcing cities to get creative. Faced with a nearly 30% office vacancy rate, Calgary has approved the conversion of more than a dozen offices into residences. The city offers $75 per square foot to owners willing to convert the space, with the goal of removing 6 million square feet of empty offices from the city's downtown by 2031. But these solutions are only scratching the surface of what's needed. The Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation says 3.5 million new units must be built by the end of the decade. And while increasing supply is one piece of the puzzle, experts say record home prices also need to be addressed.
We really need to break this cultural addiction in Canada to high and rising home prices. That's what's got us here.
An expected rate cut from the Bank of Canada later this year could make borrowing a little more affordable, a help for new home builds, but it could also increase the price of a home in many parts of the country. Omar.
All right, Heather, thank you. Still ahead, the frightening fight for life on a New York bridge. An incredible story of survival to tell you about tonight after a terrifying accident in upstate New York. A FedEx semi-trailer was left dangling from a bridge after it sideswept a vehicle and rolled over. First responders found the driver on the side of the road. 4 others, including an infant, were injured in the second vehicle. All of them are expected to be okay. A major Canadian grocer released its earnings today as another introduced a pilot project to crack down on theft at the self-checkout aisle. CTV's Annie Bergeron-Oliver on the reaction.
Grocery prices are finally showing signs of stabilizing, but after years of steep increases, shoppers like Christine Vincent are still having to make tough choices.
Being a single senior now, I'm finding it harder. Everything is going up. Little things, even $1 here or $1 there.
Since the pandemic began, experts estimate grocery prices have increased up to about 23%. And at the same time, grocery companies have increased their profits. Today, Empire, the owner of Sobeys, Farm Boy, Freshco, and Safeway, reported Q3 profits of $134.2 million. That's up 8.5% from the same quarter last year.
The revenue per square foot really hasn't changed, and I think where a lot of Sobeys profits or anybody in the retail space is coming from their sales in pharmaceuticals, in cosmetics.
In Canada, experts say profit margins are between 1% and 3%, while south of the border, where there's more competition, that number is significantly less.
Margins in the U.S. are half of what you see in Canada. So even though margins are consistent in Canada, they're pretty healthy.
To help its bottom line, Loblaw has launched a new pilot project it hopes will cut down on what it's calling organized retail crime. In 4 Ontario stores, Loblaw customers will now be forced to scan their receipts before they're allowed to leave. But today at the Woodstock store, the machine was down.
We wouldn't want Loblaws to lose any profit. I just think it's an extra step and it slows you down grocery shopping. So it doesn't value your time.
I usually go to the cashier just because I don't like the idea of people losing their jobs to automation. So Yeah, I'm not surprised they're doing that.
Some legal experts have concerns that this pilot project may infringe on customers' rights. They say if you haven't done anything wrong, you don't have to stop and shouldn't be prevented from leaving the store. Annie Bergeron-Oliver, CTV News, Ottawa.
Well, if you're shopping for stamps, you might end up buying a new commemorative one unveiled today to mark the total solar eclipse. The stamp depicts a blacked out sun over hybrid horizons of famous landmarks in Ontario, New Brunswick, and Newfoundland and Labrador. On April 8th, millions will see day turn to night across Canada, the U.S., and Mexico. And that won't happen again for another 20 years. Should be a spectacular sight. After the break, how curling ultimately led this athlete to herself. Athletes face all kinds of challenges and often find ways to surmount them. Especially true for a 20-year-old curler from Moncton who has mastered the skill of turning adversity into an opportunity to excel. Here's CTV's Sarah Plowman.
Whenever faced with a challenge, Carly Smith leans in.
So this is the liner.
The 20-year-old was born without part of her left arm. At 6 years old, she started curling.
I've been just able to adapt to things and do it in my own way.
Unable to lean on her broom for balance, she found her own technique. On the ice, Smith always felt welcome. On the streets, she felt the stares.
Especially as a child, it really bugged me. I would always wear long sleeves or hold my arm like that.
But not now. She's comfortable with herself.
So if I notice someone staring, I'll go up and talk to them about it and ask them if they have any questions.
For 3 years, Smith has played on the University of New Brunswick's curling team. This week, they're hosting the Youth Sports Championship.
She can throw a lot of weight very accurately, and that's a really big asset at third stones. The sweeping device.
Smith plays with a prosthesis. Her old one only connected to her broom. A clinic on campus built a new one that helps her switch between her broom and a stabilizer.
We didn't want it to make it two different prostheses because then she'd be taking off, kind of rolling up her sleeve, taking off the socket, then putting a socket back on.
It's up to her game.
So I'm a lot more balanced with this device and more accurate on the broom.
To those who say she has a disability,
I say put the ability in disability.
An attitude that's pushed her to study to become an occupational therapist. Those who know her call her an inspiration.
That's great. I love to hear that. I'm glad that I can inspire people with what I do, and yeah, just gonna keep doing me.
Determined to place no limits on what's possible. Sarah Plowman, CTV News, Fredericton.
Incredible determination. That's a snapshot of this Thursday. Heather's here tomorrow. For all of us at CTV National News, thank you for watching and good night.